Welcome to JR Network Tech, and I'm JR coming at you with another Cisco how-to video. If you're new to this channel, please go ahead and click that subscribe button. Now, in our previous video regarding host names, we learned how to configure a host name on a Cisco device. Now, the link to that video is in the description below. I highly advise and encourage you to check that video out. I know in that video in the beginning I make it sound like it's a super complicated process that's going to destroy your network if you don't do it right. But I promise it's very easy. It's only one command, which is the hostname command out of configuration mode. So please definitely check that video out. It's not that complicated. But the ease of configuring a hostname doesn't make it any less important. It's a very important aspect of a Cisco device configuration. But we left with the question at the end of that video of how important is a Cisco hostname? What kind of information can you get from a properly configured hostname on a Cisco device? Well, in this video, we're going to discuss just that. What kind of information, what kind of valuable information we can get from a properly configured hostname on a Cisco device, and the value of a properly configured host naming scheme, a good host name scheme. And we're also going to walk through a little example together of how we can develop a good scheme to deploy and configure in our network. We're going to go through a little configuration example of a sample device in GNS3. All right, now let's answer our first question. Just what kind of information can we get from a properly configured host name on a Cisco device? Now, as we mentioned in our previous video, a host name identifies the device. And that's important because you need to know what device you're in so that you can know what device you're configuring. Make sure you're configuring the right device and putting the right configuration into the device. But a host name, when properly configured, tells you a lot more than just simply the device. It tells you the function of the device, what that device is doing within a network. It can tell you the location of that particular device within that network topology. It can tell you even about the network itself as a whole. It can tell you what kind of network it is. It can tell you the geographical location of that network, especially if it's a multi-site setup or you're having multiple geographical locations or some type of global network that your company is using. And when you think about these aspects, these pieces of valuable information that a good host naming scheme can tell you, it's really useful because they can be the key to good organization of your network and your network devices. They can be a really nice way of employing efficient network monitoring. Perhaps if you're using some piece of software to monitor your network, or if you are having or deploying a software-defined network, a good host naming scheme is key to keeping track of all those devices within the network. And lastly, a good host naming scheme is key to troubleshooting. Imagine just how easy troubleshooting a network and troubleshooting a device would be if you had a host name that told you all kinds of valuable information about what that device was supposed to be doing within that network. You remote into a device or you console into a device, and right away you can tell where that device is located, what network it's connected to, what function it's supposed to be serving within that network. Maybe it's a edge router, or it's a core router, or some other type of device that's indicated by the host name of the device. You can know right away what that device is supposed to be doing, and that will help you to narrow down and troubleshoot exactly what's wrong and be able to get that device working the right way so that your network will function properly. Well, that answers that first question of what kind of information we can tell from a properly configured host name. But now, just how can we develop a good host naming scheme and configure that on a device? Well, we're going to step through a little example together. Let's kind of paint the scenario here. Now, before we get started, I want to ask you to get some supplies. What we're going to do is we're going to get a piece of paper here, and we're going to get something to write with as well. You know, I like to write stuff down. In fact, in your network engineering career, one of your most effective and important tools is going to be a pen and a piece of paper. So, you know, it's good to write stuff down so that you don't mess stuff up. So we got our pen and piece of paper here. We're going to write some of these things down, and let's use our imagination here. We're going to pretend that we are a network engineer that's tasked with deploying a device in our company. So we're going to say that our company is a retail store chain, and you have a lot of stores all around the continental US, right? Your stores are divided by region. So the store that we're going to be working with today is going to be in the New York City region. So that's our region, New York City. So that's our first parameter in our network host naming scheme. So let's write that down. So we're going to be in the New York City region, okay? And in this New York City region, there are 100 stores. The store that we're going to be working with is store number 97. So let's write that down. Within the New York City region, store number 97. Okay, so we wrote that down. Now, the device that we're going to be deploying, that we have to put the host name on, it's going to be an edge device. It's going to be an edge router. So when we speak of an edge device, we're talking about a device on the edge of the store's network. It's a device that's going to connect either to the service provider's broadband router or to whatever demarcation point that's at the physical location that is provided by the service provider. In either case, we're talking about a device that bridges the store's network with the outside world. So that's going to be an edge device. So let's write that down. It's an edge device. And the last parameter that we're going to talk about is going to be the device's function and location within the store's network. So this is an edge device, an edge router, and it's going to be a part of a high availability stack. So when we're talking about high availability, we're thinking about redundancy, failover. So in some topologies, you will have a primary router and a secondary router. And this is to serve the purpose of redundancy. So just in case something happens to the primary router, if that connection goes down, then the secondary backup will kick in and keep the network going. So in this setup, this is going to be our secondary router. It's going to be our backup. So we want to write that down too, secondary. Okay, so we have our parameters. Let's just briefly review. We have the New York City region, right? Store number 97. Then we have our edge router. That's the device we're going to be deploying. And it's going to be the secondary router, our second edge router in our high availability stack. Okay, so it sounds like we have all the parameters that we need. And I want you to notice something very important about the order in which we define these parameters. We basically went from the broadest parameter down to the more specific parameter. And pay attention to that. That's actually a good habit to get into when designing a good host naming scheme. It's one that a lot of companies use. Of course, your company may be using a different kind of scheme, so do whatever your company wants you to do. But it's a nice little habit to get into, a nice little mode of thinking to get into when it comes to designing and developing a proper host naming scheme. And I like to use it myself, especially for the purposes of labbing, just to keep things nice and organized, and I can know exactly what I'm doing and where I'm doing it. Again, it's a nice way to not mess stuff up. All right, so now that we have our parameters ready to go, let's jump into the equipment and see what's really going on here. And as you can see, we're in GNS3, and we have our router already spun up here. So what we're going to do, our first thing is to go into configuration mode. And to get to configuration mode, we're going to type in the command conft. Now, if you remember from the end of our last video, link is in the description below, we mentioned that we can type in conft as a shortened form of configure terminal. So they both do the same thing. It's just a shortened form. So conft, will bring us into configuration mode. And then from configuration mode, what we want to do is type in our command hostname. Oop, little typo there. Hostname. See, this is why we write stuff down. And now we're going to configure the host name using the parameters that we defined in our host naming scheme. So our first parameter was the region, New York City. So we're going to type NYC. Our next parameter is store number 97 out of 100. So we're going to hit dash and we're going to type 097. Our next parameter is that this device is an edge router. So we're going to type out edge. And our final parameter is that this is the secondary router. It's the backup in our high availability stack. So for that, we're going to just simply type 2 to indicate that it's our secondary router. It kind of implies that there's a primary router also. So let's look that over real quick. We have NYC-097-edge-2. So let's hit enter. And what we're going to do is we're going to type end, so we come back out into privileged mode. And we're just going to look that over a little bit and just verify that we have what we want and look at the information that this host name tells us. So NYC-097-edge-2. So it tells us that it's in the NYC, New York City region. It's store number 97 within that region. It's a edge router, it's an edge device, and it's the secondary router. It's edge device number 2 in our high availability stack. So does that look good to you? It looks good to me, and if it looks good to you, what we're going to type to finish off this configuration is the command write. And what that's going to do is it's going to save this change to the configuration of the router. It's going to make it permanent so that if anything happens, perhaps there's a power outage or one of your colleagues trips over the power cord and pulls it out of the outlet, because we know you would never do that. It's going to be one of your coworkers. You would never do anything like that. Or if for whatever reason this router has to reboot, we want to make sure that the changes that we made in the configuration come back up once the router reboots. So we're going to do the write command. It's going to say building configuration, and look at that. The configuration has now been successfully written to the router. So that's it. We're done. We're done making this configuration change and configuring the host name properly. So now you know how to do that. We went through a nice little example here of how to configure a host name using a good host naming scheme that's going to tell us a lot about the device, its function, its location within the network topology, and also something about the network itself, especially its geographical location. And if you have a multi-site environment, it's going to tell you something about the site that this device is located at as well. So there we go. That's it for this video. So we now know the importance of a good host name and a good host naming scheme, and we've stepped through an example together of how we can configure a good host name on a Cisco device. So now you know how to do it the right way. So you better do it right. and we know that you will. So I'd like to thank you for watching this video. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and please share this video with your friends and colleagues, so that other people can see some of the good content that's being produced on this channel. I hope that you found it enjoyable and valuable. And again, this is JR of JR Network Tech. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.